The crowd fell silent. The auction block creaked under Fiona Linden's feet. Her belly was a round, hard truth beneath the threadbare dress. Dust devils danced in the New Mexico sun. It was 1873, and Redemption Creek was a town that lived up to its name only for the men who ran it. The auctioneer's voice was like gravel in a tin can. "What do we have here, gentlemen? A fine, healthy woman, 20 years of age." His eyes slid to her stomach. "Comes with an extra mouth to feed in about 2 months' time," he announced, a sneer twisting his lips. "Can cook, clean, and sew. Starting bid is $30. Fiona's green eyes scanned the faces. Weathered, hard. Some held a flicker of pity. Others held something much, much worse. Her hands instinctively went to her belly, a shield for the only family she had left. Her husband Thomas was 3 months gone, swallowed by a mining collapse. Then the bank took the homestead. Now this, the final humiliation. "Come now, gentlemen," the auctioneer barked. "Surely someone could use an extra pair of hands." Then, from the back of the crowd, a sound, the jingle of spurs. A tall figure pushed forward, each step deliberate, cutting through the thick, uncomfortable silence. He moved to the front and took off his wide-brimmed hat. His face was carved from the sun and wind, and his blue eyes were like chips of ice. They locked onto hers. "I'll take her," he called out, his voice steady and clear. "And the baby, too," the crowd murmured. $50, the man said. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot into his hairline. $50 for the pregnant widow. Sold. To Mr. Xavier Archer, the cowboy replied. He was already pulling money from his vest. "And the lady will be riding in my wagon, not walking behind it." Fiona felt a dizzying wave of disbelief. She'd braced herself for cruelty, for a life of brutal servitude. This man's quiet command, his unexpected decency, it sparked a flicker of hope so fierce it felt dangerous. Xavier led her away from the block, his hand a firm but gentle weight on her elbow. Whispers followed them like ghosts. "That's Xavier Archer. Owns the Double Circle Ranch north of town. Heard he lost his wife in childbirth, 2 years back, never remarried. What's he want with another man's pregnant widow?" Fiona kept her head down, shame burning her cheeks, as Xavier helped her onto the seat of a modest wagon. He climbed up beside her, took the reins, and with a soft click to the horses, they were moving. They didn't speak. For nearly an hour, the only sounds were the creak of the wagon wheels and the plodding of the horses. Redemption Creek vanished behind them. The mountains loomed ahead. Fiona's mind was a whirlwind of questions, each one more terrifying than the last. Who was this man? What did he truly want from her? Finally, she found her voice. "Mr. Archer." "Xavier," he corrected, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Xavier," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "I feel I should know what expectations you have of me, what I am to be to you." His hands tightened on the reins for just a second. He let out a slow breath. "Fiona," he said, and the way he spoke her name made her look up. A faint smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I expect you to rest until that baby comes. After that, if you're willing, I could use help with the cooking and keeping house. I've got 3 ranch hands who eat like wolves, and I'm a terrible cook." She stared at his profile, searching for the trick, the lie. "That's all?" she asked. "But you paid $50. He finally turned to look at her then. His blue eyes were deep and unreadable. "I paid $50 because no woman should be sold like cattle," he said, his voice flat. "Especially not one in your condition." He turned back to the road. His jaw was a hard line. "My sister," he said, the words clipped. "She was widowed while carrying her first child. No one helped her. The silence that followed was heavy with things he wasn't saying. Tears pricked Fiona's eyes. This simple kindness, after months of nothing but hardship, felt like a blow. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," Xavier warned, his tone still gentle but with an edge to it now. "Ranch life isn't easy." They crested a hill, and a sprawling ranch opened up in the valley below. A two-story house stood at its heart, flanked by a barn, corrals, and bunkhouses. It was a kingdom of dust and timber. "Welcome to the Double Circle Ranch," Xavier said. It was beautiful, but it was also isolated, miles from anywhere, miles from anyone. A new kind of fear, cold and sharp, began to creep into Fiona's heart. As they pulled up to the main house, a tall, thin woman with gray-streaked hair came out onto the porch. She wiped her hands on an apron, her gaze sharp as it took in Fiona, her belly, and the grim expression on Xavier's face. "Martha," Xavier called out. "We have a guest. This is Mrs. Fiona Linden. She'll be staying with us." Martha's eyes flickered between them, a flicker of something that might have been approval, or maybe just resignation, crossed her face. "About time this house had a woman's touch again," she said briskly. "Come along, Mrs. Linden. You look dead on your feet." Xavier helped Fiona down. His hands were strong, impersonal. "Martha's our housekeeper," he explained. "She'll show you to your room. I need to check on the herd." And just like that, he was gone, walking toward the barn without a backward glance. Martha ushered Fiona inside. The house was cool and dark after the glare of the sun. It was clean, well kept, but it felt empty, silent. "Lord above, girl, you're thin as a rail except for that belly," Martha clucked. "When's the little one due?" "About 7 weeks," Fiona answered, her head swimming. "Plenty of time to get some meat on your bones then," Martha said, leading her up a staircase. "You just rest. The doctor from town comes by tomorrow. He'll look you over." Hours ago, she was property. Now she was being shown to a clean bedroom with a soft-looking bed. It didn't make sense. The kindness felt wrong. It felt like a mask. "Why?" Fiona asked, stopping in the doorway. "Why is he doing this?" Martha paused, her hand on the door frame. Her expression softened, but her eyes were sad. "Xavier Archer is a good man who's seen his share of sorrow," she said. "His wife, Caroline, died bringing their son into the world. The boy followed her hours later." Martha sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "Some men get bitter from a thing like that. Xavier, he got quiet." She patted Fiona's arm. "Now you rest. I'll bring up some tea." Alone in the room, Fiona sank onto the bed. The mattress was soft. The silence was absolute. She put a hand on her belly. She was safe, fed, sheltered. So why did she feel like she'd just been locked in a cage? The days at the Double Circle Ranch bled into one another. Xavier was true to his word. He expected nothing from her. In fact, he was rarely there. He left before dawn and returned after dusk, a phantom figure moving through his own home. He ate his meals with the ranch hands in the bunkhouse. He was a ghost in a silent house. The ranch hands, Jose, Caleb, and an old man named Tobias, were respectful, but distant. They tipped their hats when she passed, but their eyes skittered away from hers. They never spoke unless spoken to. It was a house full of secrets, and Fiona was at their center. As her strength returned, she started helping Martha in the kitchen. The simple, familiar work of kneading dough and peeling vegetables kept her mind from spiraling. One morning, Xavier came into the house just as the sun was rising. It was the first time she'd seen him in broad daylight in over a week. He stopped short in the kitchen doorway, his eyes landing on her flour-dusted hands. "Should you be on your feet?" he asked. His voice was rough, like he wasn't used to using it. "The baby isn't due for weeks," Fiona said. her own voice surprising her with its steadiness. "I feel stronger, and I can't let Martha do everything." His gaze lingered on her face. He seemed to be looking for something. "Just don't overdo it," he said, then turned to leave. "Be careful," she called after him. He stopped, his back still to her. For a long moment he didn't move. Then, without turning around, he walked out the door. Martha gave her a knowing look from across the kitchen. "That man needs someone worrying after him," the housekeeper said. Fiona felt a blush creep up her neck. "He's been kind to me." "Mm-hmm," Martha hummed. "And you've been good for him. This is the most I've seen him in the main house since Caroline." The name hung in the air like a ghost. "Tell me about her," Fiona asked quietly. Martha's hands stilled. "Caroline was a town girl, beautiful, educated. Her father owns the bank in Redemption Creek, a very powerful man," she sighed. "She tried to adapt to ranch life, but this place, it swallows people who aren't made for it. Still, she and Xavier were devoted." Fiona tried to picture her, this refined woman from a wealthy family. She felt a strange pang of something she couldn't name. It felt like trespassing. That night, Fiona couldn't sleep. A storm was rolling in, the wind rattling the windows. The house groaned around her. She found herself waiting for the sound of Xavier's return. The door opened well after midnight. He stumbled in, soaking wet and covered in mud. He looked utterly exhausted. Fiona rose from her chair by the cold hearth. "Xavier, are you all right?" He looked startled to see her. "Fine. A fence was down in the north pasture. Had to fix it before we lost the whole herd." He ran a hand over his face, leaving a smear of mud. "You should be in bed." "I've rested enough," she said, her voice firm. She took his arm. He was rigid at her touch, but he let her guide him to a chair. "Sit. I'll bring you some stew." He was too tired to argue. When she returned with a steaming bowl, he took it with a grateful nod. "Thank you," he said, his eyes meeting hers in the lamplight. For the first time, she saw past the guarded exterior. She saw a profound loneliness. "It's been a long time since someone waited up for me." She sat in the chair opposite him. The baby kicked, a sudden sharp jab. She winced, a hand going to her belly. Xavier's eyes followed the movement. "May I?" he asked, his voice hesitant. Surprised, she nodded. She took his calloused, cold hand and placed it on her stomach. His touch was tentative. Just then, the baby kicked again, a strong rolling motion against his palm. His eyes widened. A flicker of raw emotion crossed his face, longing, pain, something she couldn't decipher. He snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned. "I'm scared," Fiona admitted, the words tumbling out. "My mother died in childbirth. I'm afraid of leaving my baby alone." His expression hardened. The guarded look was back. "That won't happen," he said with a chilling certainty. "Dr. Winters is the best in the territory. Martha's delivered half the children in this county. You won't be alone." The conviction in his voice was meant to be comforting, but it sounded like a threat, like he wouldn't allow anything to go wrong. "And after?" she dared to ask. "What happens after the baby comes?" He looked at her for a long, silent moment. The wind howled outside. "That depends," he said slowly, "on what you want." He stood up, his tall frame blocking the firelight. "You should know, Fiona," he said, his voice low. "My wife, Caroline. Her death wasn't simple. There were complications." He stared into the darkness, but Fiona knew he was seeing the past. "The doctors said it was just bad luck, but I know better." He turned, his blue eyes boring into hers, cold and intense. "There are dangerous people in this world, people who take what they want. I won't let that happen again. Not on my land, not in my house." He took a step closer. "You and your child are safe here. I'll make sure of it." He wasn't offering her a choice. He was giving her a command. He wasn't her savior. He was her warden. 3 nights later, the pain started. It was sharp, insistent, lancing through her abdomen. She gasped, realizing with a jolt of terror and excitement that her time had come. "Martha," she called out, her voice strained as another contraction seized her. The housekeeper was there in a flash. "Breathe, child," she instructed calmly. "Xavier," she yelled down the hall. "It's time." Xavier appeared instantly, as if he'd been waiting right outside her door. His eyes were alert, intense. "Go," Martha ordered. "Tell Jose to ride for the doctor, hard and fast, then bring hot water and clean towels." He was gone without a word. The next few hours were a blur of pain. Dr. Winters arrived just before dawn, a calming presence in the storm of Fiona's labor. But through it all, she was aware of Xavier. He wasn't in the room, but he was just outside. She could feel him there, pacing the hallway like a caged wolf. Every cry she made seemed to echo in his heavy footsteps. Martha came and went, her face a mask of calm efficiency. But once, when she thought Fiona was asleep, she heard the housekeeper whisper to Xavier in the hall, "You can't control this, son. You have to have faith." "Faith is what killed Caroline," he'd replied, his voice a low, bitter growl. Then, as the sun climbed into the morning sky, a new sound filled the house, the sharp, indignant cry of a newborn. Xavier froze mid-step in the hall. The silence that followed was deafening. Minutes later, Dr. Winters opened the door, his face tired but smiling. "Mother and daughter are doing just fine, Mr. Archer. You can come in." Xavier entered the room as if stepping into a church. His eyes found Fiona first, exhausted but alive. Then his gaze dropped to the tiny bundle in her arms. "Xavier," she said softly. "Meet Elena Grace Linden." He approached the bed slowly. When Fiona tilted the bundle toward him, he caught his first glimpse of the tiny, perfect face. "She's perfect," he whispered, his voice rough. "Would you like to hold her?" Fiona asked. He looked terrified. He started to shake his head, but Fiona was already extending the baby toward him. With trembling hands, he took her. The infant felt impossibly small and fragile in his large, strong arms. He looked down at the baby, and for the first time since she'd met him, the walls around Xavier Archer crumbled. The grief, the loneliness, the tightly leashed anger, it all fell away, replaced by pure, unadulterated wonder. Something in the room shifted. The air grew lighter. But then Dr. Winters cleared his throat. "Mrs. Linden needs her rest," he said, his tone professional, but his eyes were watching Xavier closely. "I'll return in a few days, but there's something we need to discuss, Mr. Archer. Privately." Xavier reluctantly handed Elena back to Fiona. The mask was back in place, his expression unreadable. He followed the doctor out of the room. Martha shooed Fiona towards sleep, but she fought to stay awake, straining to hear their voices from the hallway. They were low, too low to make out the words, but the tone was tense, arguing. When Xavier returned to the room an hour later, the coldness was back in his eyes, more intense than ever. He looked at Fiona, then at the sleeping baby in her arms. "The doctor thinks it would be best if you and the child stayed here, indefinitely," he said. It wasn't a suggestion. "He's concerned about your health, the strain of travel." Fiona felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Dr. Winters had told her she was fine, strong, healthy. This was a lie. "Why are you doing this, Xavier?" she asked, her voice shaking. He walked to the window and stared out at the sprawling, empty land that surrounded them. "I made a promise," he said, his voice flat, and devoid of emotion. I promised myself I would never lose anyone in this house again. He turned back to face her, and his eyes were full of a terrifying resolve. You and Elena belong to me now, Fiona. I bought you, I own you, and I will never, ever let you go. Life at the Double Circle Ranch became a gilded cage. Fiona had everything she needed: food, comfort, a beautiful room. Her daughter, Alina, was healthy and happy, but she was a prisoner. Xavier watched her constantly. His eyes followed her everywhere. He wasn't cruel, not in the way other men might be, but his presence was a constant, oppressive weight. He rarely spoke to her, but she felt his control in every aspect of her life. The doors were never locked, but the vast, empty plains that surrounded the ranch were a more effective barrier than any bolt. Where could she go with a newborn baby? The ranch hands avoided her. Martha was kind, but her kindness was laced with a deep, abiding pity that Fiona found suffocating. The housekeeper seemed to be guarding her own secrets, her lips sealed tight about the true story of Caroline Archer. One afternoon, while Xavier was out on the range, Fiona grew bold. She left Elina sleeping in her cradle and began to explore the house. There was one door at the end of the upstairs hallway that was always closed. She tried the handle. It was locked. This, she knew, must have been Caroline's room. Her curiosity became an obsession. A few days later, she found a ring of old keys in a dusty drawer in the kitchen. One by one, she tried them in the lock, until, with a rusty click, the door swung open. The room was just as it had been left. A layer of dust covered everything, but it was a beautiful, feminine space. Lace curtains, a silver-backed brush on the vanity, a book of poetry on the nightstand. It was the room of a woman who was loved. But there was a coldness to it, a feeling of deep sadness. Fiona searched the room, not knowing what she was looking for. In the back of a wardrobe, tucked inside a hatbox, she found a small, leather-bound diary. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Caroline's handwriting was elegant, a series of perfect loops and swirls. The first entries were full of hope and love for her new husband, Xavier. She wrote about his kindness, his strength, his deep love for the land. But then the tone began to change. She wrote about her father, a man of immense wealth and power in Redemption Creek, a man who disapproved of her marriage to a simple rancher. "Father visited today," one entry read. "He spoke of Xavier as if he were a hired hand. He offered to buy the Double Circle, to set Xavier up in a respectable business back east." When Xavier refused, Father's eyes grew cold. He said Xavier would regret turning his back on family. Fiona's blood ran cold. She kept reading. The entries grew more frantic. Caroline wrote of strange men seen near the ranch, of accidents, a prize bull found dead, a fire in the barn that was extinguished just in time. "Xavier does not tell me, but I know he is afraid," she wrote. "He rides the perimeter every night now. He sleeps with a gun by his bed. He says it is for wolves, but I know the truth. The wolves he fears walk on two legs." Then came the final entry, dated just 2 days before Alina was born. "My time is near. I pray I give my husband a healthy son. I pray we will be safe." My father's last letter was not a plea. It was a threat. He wrote that if I would not leave Xavier, he would see him ruined. He would take everything from him, just as Xavier took me. I have hidden the evidence, the only thing that can protect my husband. He must never find it. If my father thinks Xavier has it, he will kill him. Fiona slammed the diary shut. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. It all clicked into place. Xavier's paranoia, his control, his isolation. He wasn't trying to imprison her. He was trying to protect her. He believed that Caroline's father had somehow caused her death, And now he was terrified of history repeating itself with Fiona and Alina. He was living in a fortress of his own grief and fear. Suddenly she heard hoofbeats in the yard below. Fast, urgent. Fiona shoved the diary back into the hat box and fled the room, her mind reeling. She got back to her own room just as a man's voice, sharp and cold, cut through the afternoon quiet. "Archer, I know you're in there. I have business with the widow Linden." Fiona peered out the window. 3 riders were in the yard. The man in the lead was Samuel Burke, the debt collector from the auction. But he didn't look like a debt collector now. He looked like a hunter, and his eyes were fixed on the house. Xavier strode out onto the porch. He moved with a calm, deadly grace. He wasn't holding a rifle, but Fiona knew he had a revolver tucked into his belt. "Burke," Xavier said, his voice deceptively mild, "you're on private property." "I'm here on behalf of the bank," Burke sneered, swinging down from his horse. "Seems the widow's late husband had some outstanding debts, significant ones." "Any business you have with Mrs. Linden, you have with me," Xavier stated. Burke's eyes narrowed. He took a step closer. "The bank has authorized me to collect what's owed, or to take possession of assets of equal value." His gaze drifted over Fiona's meager belongings, which had been unloaded from the wagon and sat in a small pile near the porch. A wooden chest, a carpet bag. His interest seemed specific, too specific for a random debt. "There's nothing there worth the paper the debt is written on," Xavier said, his voice dropping. "Get off my land." "Now, I have a legal document right here," Burke said, reaching into his coat. "Says Thomas Linden owed $300, signed and sealed." He produced a piece of paper. Before he could even extend it, Xavier moved. He was a blur of motion. One moment he was on the porch, the next he had Burke by the collar, the barrel of his revolver pressed under the man's chin. Burke's men reached for their guns, but froze when Jose and Caleb stepped out of the barn, rifles leveled and ready. "That signature is a forgery," Xavier growled, his voice low and dangerous. Terror flashed in Burke's eyes. I was just following orders." "Whose orders?" Xavier demanded. "The bank's, Mr. Abernathy's," Fiona gasped. Abernathy. That was Caroline's father's name. Martha had mentioned it once. The powerful man who owned the bank in Redemption Creek. This wasn't about a debt. It was about something else entirely. Xavier shoved Burke away from him. "Tell Mr. Abernathy that if he or any of his dogs ever set foot on my land again, I'll bury them where they stand." He stared Burke down, his eyes blazing with a cold fire Fiona had never seen before. "Tell him I know what he did to Caroline, and tell him I will never let him touch what is mine." Burke scrambled back onto his horse, his face pale. He and his men galloped away, kicking up a storm of dust. The yard fell silent. Xavier stood there for a long moment, his back to the house, his shoulders heaving. When he finally turned around, his face was a mask of anguish. He looked up at the window where Fiona stood watching. Their eyes met. The truth was finally out. Not all of it, but enough. The cage she was in wasn't for her. It was for him, and the monster he was trying to keep out was far more terrifying than she could ever have imagined. That night he came to her room. He didn't knock. He just opened the door and stood there, a silhouette against the dim light of the hallway. Elina was asleep in her cradle, her breathing soft and even. "You read it," he said. It wasn't a question. "You went into her room." Fiona nodded, her throat tight. "Yes." He walked to the window and looked out into the impenetrable darkness. "I should have told you. I'm sorry." "What did he do to her, Xavier?" she whispered. He let out a long, shuddering breath. "Abernathy controls everything in this territory. The judges, the lawmen, everyone. He wanted me to join him, to use my ranch as a front for his business. Smuggling, laundering money. When I refused, he swore he'd ruin me. He turned from the window, his face etched with pain. He started with little things, poisoned wells, rustled cattle. Then Caroline got pregnant. He saw it as his final hold over me. He thought for the sake of his grandchild, I would finally give in. Xavier's hands clenched into fists at his sides. I still said no. A week later, the doctor, a man on Abernathy's payroll, came to check on her. He gave her a tonic, said it was for her strength. She died that night. The doctor called it a complication of childbirth. His voice broke. But I know what it was. It was poison. It was murder. But I couldn't prove it. No one would stand against Abernathy. Fiona felt a wave of horror and pity wash over her. This poor, broken man. He hadn't been a warden. He'd been a protector. A lone soldier fighting a war no one else could see. And now, me? She asked. He must have learned about the auction. He must have recognized your husband's name, Thomas Linden. Xavier looked at her, a new, urgent question in his eyes. Fiona, what did your husband do before he was a miner? He was a bookkeeper, she said, confused. Back east, he never spoke of it much. Xavier's face went pale. A bookkeeper? For who? I don't know. A shipping company, I think. No, Xavier said, his mind clearly racing. Abernathy's wealth comes from shipping. It's how he moves his illegal goods. Your husband must have worked for him. He must have seen something, learned something. That's why he fled out here, to become a simple miner. The pieces were slotting together with terrifying speed. The mining accident, Fiona breathed. Was no accident, Xavier finished, his voice grim. And that debt Burke came to collect, it was a lie, an excuse. He strode over to the small wooden chest that held all of Fiona's worldly possessions. They weren't looking for money, Fiona. They were looking for whatever it was your husband took from Abernathy. Proof, a ledger, something that could destroy him. He looked at her, his eyes wild with a sudden, desperate hope. Did he leave you anything? Papers, a book, anything at all? Fiona's mind raced. She thought of the small, heavy box at the bottom of her chest. The one Thomas had told her was just mining deeds. The one he'd made her promise to never, ever lose. Before she could answer, a gunshot shattered the night. A window in the hallway exploded, showering the floor with glass. Another shot followed, then another. They were back, and this time they weren't leaving empty-handed. Get down! Xavier yelled, shoving Fiona toward the floor and pulling the heavy wooden bed in front of the window. Alina woke with a terrified wail. Stay here, don't make a sound, he commanded, drawing his revolver. He was no longer the grieving husband or the quiet rancher. He was a warrior, his eyes cold and focused. He slipped out of the room, and Fiona heard him calling to his men. Jose, Caleb, to the house, we're under siege. Fiona scrambled across the floor, scooped a screaming Alina from her cradle, and huddled in the corner, trying to make them both as small as possible. The house erupted in a symphony of violence. Gunshots, splintering wood, the shouts of men. This wasn't a raid. It was an invasion. Abernathy hadn't just sent Burke. He'd sent a small army. Fiona's mind was a blur of terror, but one thought cut through the chaos. The box. The heavy little box at the bottom of her chest. Thomas hadn't been a miner. He'd been a bookkeeper who ran. He hadn't died in an accident. He'd been murdered. And he had left the reason for his death in her care. She had to get to it. Keeping low, she crawled across the room to her chest, Alina clutched tight against her. Her hands fumbled with the latch. She threw clothes aside until her fingers hit the cold, hard wood of the box. It was locked. Of course, it was locked. She frantically searched for the key, her mind racing. Thomas had kept it on a string around his neck. When they'd given her his effects, the string had been there, but the key had been gone. They must have taken it. Outside, the battle raged. Fiona could hear Xavier's voice, calm and commanding, directing his men. They were outnumbered, she knew that. It was only a matter of time before Burke's men breached the house. Then she remembered. Thomas had been clever. He'd told her once, joking, that the best place to hide a key is in the lock itself. She felt along the front of the box, her fingers tracing the intricate metalwork around the keyhole. There, a tiny, almost invisible button. She pressed it. With a soft click, a false plate fell away, revealing a small, tarnished brass key tucked inside. With trembling hands, she unlocked the box. It wasn't filled with mining deeds. It was a ledger. Page after page of her husband's neat, precise handwriting, detailing names, dates, and shipments. Cargo manifests that listed machine parts, but were coded to mean rifles, ammunition, and opium. All signed and authorized by one man, Abernathy. This was it, the proof, the weapon Xavier needed. Suddenly, the gunfire from downstairs stopped. An eerie silence fell over the house. Then a voice boomed from the yard. It was Burke. "Archer, we have your housekeeper. Send out the woman and the book, or the old lady dies." Fiona's blood ran cold. "Martha." A moment later, Xavier's voice came from the bottom of the stairs. His tone was low, tight with fury. "Fiona, do you have it?" Clutching the ledger to her chest, she crept to the door. He was standing there, his face grim, his revolver held ready. "Yes," she whispered. He nodded, his jaw set. "Good, because we're not giving it to them." "But Martha—" "Martha knew the risks of staying with me," he said, his voice hard as steel. But his eyes were full of pain. "She made her choice a long time ago. Now you have to make yours. Do we give that monster what he wants and let him win? Or do we fight?" He was asking her what kind of world she wanted to bring her daughter into. One where men like Abernathy ruled through fear, or one where people stood up to them, no matter the cost. She looked down at Alina, sleeping now in her arms, blissfully unaware of the war being waged for her future. She looked at Xavier, this man who had bought her to protect her, who had locked her away to keep her safe, who was now willing to die for her. She thought of Thomas, her gentle husband, who had died trying to do the right thing. Her choice was clear. "We fight," she said. A slow smile spread across Xavier's face. It was the first true smile she had ever seen from him, and it was breathtaking. "I was hoping you'd say that," he said. "Now stay here. This will all be over soon." He turned and disappeared down the stairs. Fiona waited, her heart pounding with every agonizingly slow tick of the clock. She heard voices from outside, arguing. Then a single gunshot echoed through the night. An unbearable silence followed. She didn't know if it was Martha. She didn't know if it was Xavier. The front door creaked open. Heavy footsteps started up the stairs. Fiona backed into the corner, holding the ledger like a shield, her body covering Alina. The footsteps stopped outside her door. The handle turned. The door swung open. It was Xavier. He was battered, bruised, and bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but he was alive, and he was alone. "It's over," he said, his voice ragged with exhaustion and relief. "Martha," Fiona whispered, fearing the answer. "She's fine, tougher than any of them," he said with a weary grin. "She bit Burke's hand so hard he dropped his gun. That's when the marshal arrived." "The marshal?" "I sent Jose for him before Burke ever came back. I knew this was coming. I've been building a case against Abernathy for 2 years. That ledger was the final piece." He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, carefully cradling her and Alina against him. He was solid. He was real. He was safe. "It's all over, Fiona," he murmured into her hair. "He can't hurt us anymore." They stood there for a long time, the three of them, a strange and broken little family brought together by violence and grief and held together by a fierce, unspoken love. In the aftermath, justice came swift and hard. The ledger, combined with the testimony of Burke and his captured men, was enough to bring Abernathy's empire crashing down. The territorial government, finally armed with undeniable proof, seized his assets and arrested him for murder, smuggling, and a dozen other crimes. The town of Redemption Creek was free of his shadow. The Double Circle Ranch was finally at peace. A few weeks later, Xavier found Fiona sitting on the porch, rocking Elina as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He stood beside her, watching the colors fade. "I know it's too soon," he began, his voice hesitant. "And I know our beginning was complicated. But I want you to stay, Fiona. Not as my guest, not as someone I'm protecting." He knelt in front of her, taking her free hand in his. His blue eyes, once so cold and guarded, were now warm and full of a sincere, gentle love. "Stay as my wife," he said. "Let me be a father to Elina. Let's build a life here together, a real one, a happy one." Tears streamed down Fiona's face, but for the first time in a very long time, they were tears of joy. "My husband Thomas was a good man," she said quietly. "But our marriage was one of necessity. I was fond of him, but I never knew love could feel like this." She leaned forward and kissed him, sealing their promise under the wide-open sky. 5 years later, the porch was bigger. The laughter was louder. Elina, now a spirited girl with her mother's green eyes, chased her 3-year-old brother Thomas across the lawn. Xavier bounced their infant daughter Lily on his knee, his face alight with a happiness he once thought was lost to him forever. Fiona came out with a tray of lemonade and watched her family, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "What are you thinking about, husband?" she asked, slipping her arm around his waist. He looked at her, his love for her shining in his eyes. "I was just thinking about the best $50 I ever spent," he said softly. He looked from his wife to his children, his gaze sweeping over the peaceful, thriving ranch that was their home. "I got exactly what I needed," he said, "even when I didn't know how to ask for it." As the sun set on their little kingdom, Xavier Archer gathered his family close, profoundly grateful for the day he had bought a stranger, and in doing so, had finally redeemed himself. What do you think is the most important part of a family? The one you're born into, or the one you build for yourself? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of redemption in the Old West, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of survival and justice.